Picture this. You are standing on the slick, rotting deck of a warship anchored in a foreign harbor, and you have not been paid in 8 months. The wood beneath your boots is soft with rot. The salt has eaten through your wool coat. Below deck, men who once dreamed of treasure now gnaw on weevil-ridden biscuit and whisper about debtors' prison, about the families starving back in Devon and Plymouth, about owners in London who pocketed their wages and forgot they existed. You are not a captain. You are not a king of the sea. You are a first mate, a middle manager of misery, a forgotten man on a forgotten ship rotting in the rain off the coast of Spain. We love to imagine the pirate as a grinning figure in a feathered hat, a black flag snapping overhead, gold spilling across a tropical beach. We do not imagine this. We do not imagine the cold, the hunger, the slow humiliation of a sailor robbed by his own employers. But this is exactly where the most successful thief in human history actually began. His name was Henry Avery, and within 2 years this freezing, unpaid second-in-command would rob a floating palace of the most powerful empire on Earth, ignite the first worldwide manhunt ever recorded, and then perform the one trick no emperor, no navy, and no bounty hunter could ever undo. He would vanish, completely. So thoroughly that 3 centuries later, with all our archives and historians and ground-penetrating curiosity, we still cannot tell you for certain where he died, or how, or under what name. How does a penniless sailor pull off the greatest heist in history and then erase himself from the face of the planet? That is the question that has haunted treasure hunters for 300 years. Before we sail into one of the most extraordinary disappearing acts ever pulled off, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden machinery behind history's greatest legends, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I find it genuinely remarkable that we can gather like this, scattered across every coastline and continent, connected across time by our shared hunger for the stories the textbooks left out. To understand what Avery did, you first have to understand the trap he was caught in. The year was 1694, and Henry Avery was the first mate of a privateering vessel anchored at the Spanish port of Corunna. The expedition was supposed to be lucrative. Wealthy investors in London had financed a small fleet to harass French shipping and raid Spanish wrecks in the Caribbean. But the venture stalled. Spanish bureaucracy tangled the paperwork. The ship sat. Weeks became months. And the men were not paid a single coin. Imagine signing a contract for a high-risk job, relocating across the world for it, and then being told the project is delayed indefinitely while your bank account drains to zero and your landlord changes the locks. That was the precise economic reality on that deck. These were not romantic adventurers. They were desperate laborers being slowly destroyed by the people who hired them. Most men in that situation do what most men always do. They endure. They wait. They write pleading letters that go unanswered, and they slowly rot alongside the ship. Mutiny, after all, was the fastest known route to a hangman's noose. To seize a vessel was to declare war on the entire legal order of the civilized world, to make yourself an outlaw hunted by every flag on every sea. The mathematics of rebellion were suicidal, and every sailor knew it. This is the exact moment Henry Avery stopped behaving like a victim of the system and started behaving like a man who had calculated, very coldly, that the system was already going to kill him anyway. On a dark night in May, while the captain lay drunk and senseless in his cabin, Avery and a corps of conspirators moved. There was almost no blood. He had spent weeks quietly identifying which men were loyal to their empty pockets and which were loyal to a fantasy of fair pay, and he had organized them with the patience of a man building a case. They took the ship. When the bewildered captain stumbled up on deck, Avery reportedly told him with chilling calm that he was now the commander, that he intended to make his fortune, and that the captain was free to stay or go. The captain chose to leave. Avery renamed the vessel the Fancy, pointed her bow toward the open Atlantic, and in a single night transformed himself from a robbed and forgotten employee into the master of his own destiny. I always find it striking that the greatest pirate in history began not with a lust for gold, but with a refusal to be cheated. But seizing a ship is the easy part. Any angry crew can stage a mutiny. The real genius, the thing that separates Avery from the hundreds of forgotten mutineers who were caught and hanged within a year, was what he built next. He understood a problem that had plagued every navy and every captain for centuries. How do you keep a crew of armed, desperate criminals loyal when there is no king, no law, and no force on earth that can compel them to obey you? His answer was a quiet revolution in organization. The Royal Navy of his era ran on terror and theft. Sailors were press-ganged, kidnapped off the streets, flogged for the smallest offense, and routinely cheated of their wages by officers who lived like aristocrats while the men ate rot. Avery looked at this entire model and threw it overboard. Aboard the Fancy, he instituted a written code, a set of articles that every man signed. The loot would be divided in fixed, transparent shares. The captain took only a modest multiple of what an ordinary sailor received, not a fortune. Decisions of consequence were put to a vote. A man who lost a limb in battle was compensated from the common fund before anyone else was paid. Think of it as a brutal 17th century startup luring away abused talent from a monopoly corporation, not with a salary, but with equity and a seat at the table. On the Fancy, every man was a part-owner of the enterprise, and a part-owner does not desert. A part-owner fights. Then he turned to the ship itself. Avery understood that his entire survival depended on a single variable that the navies of the world had forgotten to optimize: speed. A pirate cannot win a war of attrition against an empire. He can only strike and flee. So he sailed the Fancy to a quiet anchorage, careened her on her side, scraped the years of barnacles and weed from her hull, and stripped away the heavy, decorative superstructure that slowed her down. He cut her down lean and low until she was, by many accounts, one of the fastest vessels on the ocean. He had built a machine with two functions: to catch anything and to outrun everything. With a loyal crew bound by profit-sharing and a hull built for escape, Avery now pointed that machine toward the richest target on the planet. And here is where Avery proves he was not a reckless brigand but a patient, calculating predator. He did not simply roam the seas hopping to stumble upon wealth. He had a specific, intelligent target in mind, and he knew exactly where to wait for it. Every year, a great fleet of ships belonging to the Mughal Empire, the wealthiest empire on earth at the time, sailed from India to the Red Sea, carrying pilgrims to Mecca and merchants to the markets of Arabia. They departed laden with goods to trade, and crucially, they returned laden with the proceeds, with gold, with silver, with the accumulated wealth of a continent's commerce flowing back toward the Mughal port of Surat. Avery did not need to hunt across 10,000 miles of empty ocean. He needed only to sit at the one narrow door every one of those ships had to pass through. That door was the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, a narrow choke point at the southern mouth of the Red Sea where the water funnels between Africa and Arabia. It was the geographic equivalent of a bank's only entrance. Every treasure ship returning from the pilgrimage had to squeeze through it. Avery brought the Fancy to those waters in the summer of 1695 and waited. He was not alone. Other pirate captains, drawn by the same logic and the same rumors of Mughal gold, had gathered nearby, and Avery, in a final display of his organizational instinct, forged them into a loose flotilla, an alliance of perhaps half a dozen ships agreeing to share whatever they took. He had turned solitary, squabbling outlaws into a temporary syndicate. He understood that a single hull might fail to catch the prize, but a net of 6 hulls strung across the strait could not be slipped. The victory, as with all great campaigns, was being engineered weeks before the first shot was fired. For a moment it seemed the patience would be wasted. On a dark night, the great Mughal fleet, some 25 vessels strong, slipped through the strait in the blackness and stole past the waiting pirates almost entirely undetected. Imagine months of preparation, the careened hull, the assembled syndicate, the long hot weeks of waiting, all of it evaporating as the richest convoy on earth glided silently past your blind spot in the dark. The other captains might have cursed their luck and turned for home. Avery did something else. He gave chase. His scouts had spotted the tail end of the convoy, and Avery, trusting the lean, fast hull he had built, pursued the stragglers across the open water. The first ship his syndicate ran down was a large merchantman called the Fay de Muhammad. Her crew, perhaps having heard what these men had done to others, perhaps simply outgunned, surrendered without the prolonged fight everyone expected. The hold gave up a fortune, tens of thousands of pounds in treasure, a haul that would have made any ordinary pirate captain wealthy for life. For most men, that would have been the moment to break off, to count the blessing and run for a safe harbor before their luck turned. But Avery had seen something on the horizon, a far larger shape, a true giant among the fleeing ships, and he understood that the Fay de Muhammad was not the prize. It was merely the appetizer. The giant was the Ganjai Sawai, a name that translates roughly to exceeding treasure, and she was no mere merchant vessel. She was one of the grandest ships in the Mughal navy, a floating fortress personally owned by the Emperor Aurangzeb himself. She carried dozens of heavy cannon and hundreds of armed guards, a defending force that may have outnumbered Avery's boarding party several times over. She was, by every rational measure, unassailable, a warship that should have crushed a stripped-down pirate sloop like an afterthought. To attack her with a handful of outlaws was, on paper, simple suicide. And yet what unfolded over the next hours is one of the strangest accidents in military history. As the Fancy closed in and the two ships exchanged opening fire, fortune turned against the giant in an instant. One of the Ganjai Sawai's own great cannons, overloaded or poorly cast, burst as it fired, detonating on her own deck, killing her own gunners and throwing the defenders into chaos and smoke. In the same chaotic minutes, a lucky shot from the Fancy is said to have brought down the giant's mainmast, fouling her rigging and crippling her ability to maneuver. The defending captain, by the surviving accounts, lost his nerve at the critical moment, failing to rally the hundreds of soldiers who should have easily repelled the boarders. What should have been a massacre of the pirates collapsed into a desperate, hours-long fight across a smoke-choked deck, and through a combination of ferocity, accident, and an enemy's failure of will, Avery's men took the impossible ship. I find it almost dizzying to consider. A robbed and unpaid sailor, 2 years removed from rotting in a Spanish harbor, had just captured the personal treasure ship of the most powerful monarch on the planet. What they found in her hold defies easy description. The Ganjai Sawai was returning from the pilgrimage stuffed with the wealth of an empire, with chests of gold and silver coin, with jewels, with precious goods accumulated from the richest trading economy in the world. The most credible estimates place the value of the haul somewhere between 300,000 and 600,000 pounds, a sum so vast in the currency of the 17th century that it is nearly impossible to translate. It was, by any reasonable measure, the single largest pirate haul in recorded history, a fortune that dwarfed the lifetime earnings of an English nobleman. Every common sailor aboard the Fancy walked away with a personal share worth 1,000 pounds or more, a sum it would have taken him several lifetimes of honest labor to earn. In a single afternoon, the forgotten men of Corunna had become richer than the merchants who had once refused to pay them. But I cannot tell this story honestly and let the romance stand unbroken, because what happened aboard the Ganjai Sawai after the fighting stopped was not romance. It was atrocity. The captured ship carried not only treasure but passengers, including women returning from the holy pilgrimage, and over the days that followed, Avery's crew committed acts of such brutality against those captives that the accounts have horrified historians for centuries. Some of the captives are said to have taken their own lives rather than endure what the pirates inflicted. I will not dress these events in adventure story language, because there is nothing adventurous about them. This is the line where the legend turns black, where the clever underdog who refused to be cheated becomes a perpetrator of horror. And it is precisely this horror, this crossing from theft into something far darker, that transformed Henry Avery in a single voyage from an obscure mutineer into the most wanted man on the face of the earth. The gold made him rich. What was done aboard that ship made him hunted. Because the Ganjai Sao did not belong to some minor merchant who could be ignored. She belonged to Aurangzeb, the Mughal emperor, the ruler of perhaps a fifth of all the human beings alive on the planet, a monarch whose wealth and power made the kings of Europe look like provincial landlords. And when news of what had been done to his ship and his subjects reached his court, his fury was absolute, and it was aimed squarely at the English. The Mughal Empire correctly understood that these pirates had sailed under an English flag, and Aurangzeb held the entire English presence in India responsible for the crime. The consequences fell instantly on the East India Company, the English trading corporation whose entire fortune depended on the emperor's goodwill. Aurangzeb ordered the company's trading posts shut down. He had its officials at the port of Surat seized and imprisoned, clapped in irons, their warehouses placed under guard. He threatened to expel the English from his domains entirely, to end the trade that was making the company one of the richest enterprises in the world. Picture a single rogue actor stealing a fortune and committing an atrocity so severe that it threatens to sever an entire nation's most lucrative commercial relationship overnight, freezing billions in trade and endangering thousands of jobs. The company faced ruin not for anything it had done, but for the actions of one man it had never employed. To survive, it was forced to grovel, to promise the emperor enormous compensation, and to make one further pledge that would change the nature of crime and punishment forever. It promised to hunt Henry Avery down. And so was born something the world had never seen before, a truly global manhunt. The Crown and the company together issued proclamations and posted bounties, sums of money offered for Avery's capture that were, for their time, staggering. His name and description were printed and circulated to ports across the world, from the Americas to Africa to the Indian Ocean. This was, by many reckonings, the first worldwide wanted poster in human history, a coordinated effort spanning oceans and empires to find a single man. There was now no friendly harbor, no safe coastline, no port authority anywhere in the reach of European or Mughal power that did not have a reason to seize Henry Avery on sight and turn him in for the reward. He had, in capturing the greatest prize in history, simultaneously made himself the most pursued human being alive. The whole world was now a closing net, and Avery sat at the center of it with a fortune in jewels and absolutely nowhere on earth to spend it. This is the part of the story that elevates Avery from a lucky thief to a kind of dark genius, and it is the part almost everyone forgets, because the truth is that pulling off a heist is the simple half of the equation. History is littered with men who stole fortunes and were dead or in chains within the year, undone not by the robbery, but by the impossible problem of what to do afterward. The gold is heavy. The jewels are recognizable. The name is on every wanted poster from London to Bombay. The real, almost unsolvable challenge was never the stealing. It was the spending, the hiding, the surviving. And here Avery displayed a discipline that his doomed contemporaries utterly lacked. He pointed the fancy not toward any European port, where capture was certain, but across the Atlantic toward the lawless edge of the world, to the island of New Providence in the Bahamas, a sun-bleached haven where royal authority was thin and a governor's loyalty could be purchased. There Avery did something that reveals the cold strategist beneath the legend. He went to the colonial governor, a man named Nicholas Trott, and he bought him. He offered him the fancy herself, the famous ship, along with a fortune in gold and ivory, in exchange for safe harbor and a blind eye. The governor, faced with a bribe larger than years of his lawful salary, took the deal. Avery had grasped a principle that the gold-drunk fools around him never would. The treasure was not for keeping. It was for spending on the one thing more valuable than treasure, which was the ability to disappear. Then came the masterstroke, the act that breaks the heist apart and scatters it beyond recovery. Avery dissolved his own crew. He understood with chilling clarity that a large band of newly rich Englishmen all speaking the same accent and spending the same suspicious gold was a beacon that would draw the manhunt straight to him. So he let them go. The men split the treasure and scattered to the winds, some to the American colonies, some back toward Britain and Ireland, each carrying his share and his secret alone. And Avery himself simply ceased to be Henry Avery. He shed the name like a snakeskin. He surfaces in the records under aliases, under a borrowed surname, a quiet, unremarkable man on a quiet, unremarkable vessel, indistinguishable from 1,000 other travelers. The notorious fancy was gone, traded away. The famous captain was gone, dissolved into a false name. Where greed kept other pirates flashy and findable, Avery's genius was restraint, the discipline to become nobody, the strategic decision that the cleanest victory was not to fight the net, but to slip through its gaps before it ever fully closed. And the net most certainly closed, just not on him. The manhunt was real, and it was relentless, and it caught fish. Several of Avery's former crewmen, unable to resist the pull of home or the temptation to spend, drifted back toward Britain and were recognized, seized, and dragged before the courts. The trials that followed were a spectacle. In the first, an English jury, perhaps secretly delighting in the humiliation of a foreign emperor, stunningly refused to convict the men at all. The authorities, desperate to deliver the heads they had promised Aurangzeb, simply retried them on different charges until a conviction was secured, and in the end several of Avery's men climbed the scaffold and were hanged, their bodies left as a warning to others. The empire got its blood. It got the underlings, the careless ones, the men who could not resist looking back. But the one name everyone wanted, the one face on every poster, the architect of the entire affair, was nowhere. Henry Avery had become a ghost while his crew swung in the wind, and the most powerful hunting machine the world had ever assembled simply closed its fingers around empty air. So where did he go? Here, at the very end, the historical record dissolves into legend, and the legend is a dark and fitting one. The most enduring story, passed down through later chroniclers of pirate history, holds that Avery slipped back into England, into the west country of his birth, a quiet man sitting on a fortune in diamonds he could never openly sell. The trouble with stolen jewels is that they must be sold through merchants, and merchants who deal with a hunted fugitive know that the fugitive cannot complain to the law. According to the legend, Avery handed his diamonds to a circle of Bristol merchants to be quietly sold on his behalf, and those merchants, recognizing that their client was a wanted man with no recourse, simply kept the money. They paid him in scraps and excuses, then in nothing at all, and the greatest thief in the history of the world, the man who had robbed an emperor and outwitted 2 empires, is said to have died in poverty, anonymous and broke, allegedly not even leaving enough behind to pay for his own coffin. Whether this tale is true, no one can prove. And that uncertainty is the final, perfect twist of the whole affair. Because consider what it means. We can tell you more or less where Aurangzeb is buried, an emperor of legendary power. We can locate the graves of kings. But Henry Avery, a sailor from Devon who became the most hunted man on the planet, simply walked off the edge of the historical map and was never definitively seen again. No confirmed grave, no verified death, no reliable final chapter. He achieved the one form of immortality that gold can never buy and that emperors with all their armies could not deny him. He disappeared so completely that he passed out of fact and into pure myth, his story growing into stage plays and legends of a pirate utopia, a free kingdom of equals founded on some distant shore. The man became smoke, and the smoke became a legend that has outlived every empire involved in chasing him. And that, in the end, is the uncomfortable lesson buried in this story. We are taught that the point of a great heist is the treasure, the gold, the spending of it, the rich and easy life it buys. But Avery's haul, the largest in pirate history, seems to have bought him almost nothing at all. The men who spent it loudly were hanged. The man who possibly let it be stolen from him, who chose anonymity over wealth, was the only one who kept the thing that actually mattered, which was his freedom, his breath, his unmarked grave. He understood. perhaps better than anyone in his bloody trade, that the deepest form of wealth is not what you can acquire but what you can walk away from, that the ultimate prize is not the gold in the hold but the power to become no one, untouchable, ungovernable, a name the most powerful empires on earth wrote on a poster and could never, ever cross out. When you look at the modern world, at the offshore accounts and the false identities, at the figures who steal fortunes and slip across borders and dissolve into anonymity beyond the reach of any law, you are looking at the long shadow of a freezing, unpaid first mate who decided, on a rotting deck in a Spanish harbor, that he would rather become a ghost than remain a victim. He did not invent greed, but he may have perfected the art of the disappearance, and we have been trying to solve his vanishing for 300 years. So I want to know what you think. Was Henry Avery a brilliant strategist who beat the most powerful empires on earth at their own game, a man who understood freedom better than the kings who hunted him? Or was he simply a violent criminal who got astonishingly lucky once and then quietly lost everything in the dark, a legend built on a fortune he never even got to keep? And what other vanished figure from history, what unsolved disappearance or forgotten outlaw should we put under the microscope next? Let me know down in the comments. If this deep dive into the machinery of history's greatest heist gripped you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.